Thank you, Dr. Rajeshri. Let me start by thanking Father Fraser for embarrassing me just before I start my presentation. But you can see that he is a leader who walks the talk. He kind of gives credit, though, as you can see, exaggerated, so that he motivates people to, continue in this field of quality education. Okay. Now, I'm sure after Father Fraser's talk, you're all motivated to quality education, to improve the teaching learning processes and establish systems in your college and in your courses. And what I'm going to deal with is quality assessments, because I think assessments are really the key to quality in teaching learning. Basically, we are talking about the new normal, and what the pandemic has done, it has brought higher education into the online sphere. Lots of teachers, at least I know in our college, who were, resisting this kind of changeover, but the pandemic has made it a necessity. So you have online teaching, either a pure online teaching or a hybrid mode. And this, as Father Fraser says, requires, if you want to give good education, an interactive process. And for that, quality assessments are very, very important. Now, coincidentally, the last question was something about outcome-based education. And so I want to refer to that too. The new UGC guidelines talks about outcome-based education. And I think Dr. Sybil must have touched on this definitely. It mirrors the institution vision and mission, and it talks about program education objectives, program learning outcomes, and course learning outcomes. I'm sure most of you have gone through all this and designed your course learning outcomes, as this is a UGC requirement. And I am sure you all have, when talking about your course learning outcomes, looked at both the academic skills, the higher order learning skills, critical thinking, creativity, etc. But you'll have also looked at the soft skills of group dynamics, confidence, communication. Okay, so this is where you are. You have designed your course learning outcomes, and you have your rich experience of teaching with you. Now, how do we translate all this experience that you have, your teaching, into the realization of the course learning outcomes you have designed? Now, basically, it is with respect to, now we're talking about your course, the course you are teaching. It depends on the syllabus, the assessments, and the teaching learning methodologies. Now, syllabus content, if you're autonomous, you can design your own syllabus. You can enrich your syllabus to match some of the course learning outcomes. If you're non-autonomous, this is something you may be part of the board of studies, or this is something that the university has given you. What you have as a teacher are the teaching learning methodologies and the assessments. And I believe that as one teaches, one assesses, and as one assesses, one teaches. I want to emphasize this. Now Father Fraser spoke about developing the higher order learning skills, and this I'm sure all of you want. Now, let's say we want them to develop the higher order learning skill of critical thinking, but we teach in a rote learning manner right through the semester, and at the assessment, because that is something in our that we want, we design a paper that involves a lot of application, critical thinking, creativity questions. Now, I don't know about your students, but my students would immediately, there would be an uproar, there would be conflict, because they would not do as well as they would have done otherwise, because I taught them in a rote learning manner, and they had come prepared to answer that type of paper. Okay. And the other part also is true, that if you teach in a manner that develops the higher order learning skills, and then ask a memorization kind of a paper, again, students are not going to benefit. So we have to match the teaching and the assessment if we really want to develop all these higher order learning skills. We want to, realize the course outcomes accordingly. So assessment, therefore, I say, is the engine which drives student learning. And this, I think, is important not only with student learning, with any learning. Unless you are assessed, only then will you really put in your 100% and you develop that skill. It's if you learn music or dance, or it's in any field. Okay. Now, therefore, the point that Father Fraser made, and I'm emphasizing again, because unless all of you are convinced about this, that if you want quality teaching learning, you have to align the intended learning outcomes, your course learning outcomes, with the design of the teaching learning activities and the assessment tasks. These have to be aligned. And they cannot be aligned at the end of the semester or the middle of the semester. This has to be done at the very beginning. At the very beginning, when the syllabus is set, you have to say, okay, these are the course outcomes. Therefore, what type of assessments would I have? So that's the next thing. You first design your assessments, and accordingly, you teach. Okay, so the three have to be aligned. Your course learning outcomes are the first ones that you have to decide upon. You then design your assessments, and then plan your teaching learning activities. What I'm going to do in this session, as per the topic of my presentation, is talk about quality assessments. Now, we have two types of assessments. You have the question paper format, either objective and or subjective. It could be and or. And you have various alternate assessments, presentations, assignments, field visits, internships, etc., etc. Okay. Now, I am now you could take up any system. It has to be structured. But in St. Xavier's College, where Father Fraser and me were, we took up the Bloom's Taxonomy. And as you know now, that even the UGC has taken up Bloom's Taxonomy. So this is something that I'm taking on this system. But this is just a system. The thought behind this is that we want to have all these higher order skills in our students, and that I'm sure all of you will agree to. So I won't spend time on this. Father Fraser has already explained this. And he spoke about the template of the question paper, the various modules. I've taken all, remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, with the total marks per learning skill and the percentages. Now, you have heard this from Father Fraser, you've understood it, but unless you practice, you won't really, you won't really gauge the application of this process. And therefore, right at the very beginning of my presentation, within the first 15 minutes, I am going into a kind of workshop. So I'm going to ask you to make a very rough template, which, as in the previous template, Father Fraser explained this, that it is for each course and it is designed by the faculty teaching the course as per Bloom's Taxonomy. It depends on the course and the year of study. There are some courses that you need to have a lot of memorization, something like taxonomy. And first year students find it more difficult to reach the higher order learning skills at the very beginning. So it depends upon the year of study. And in this system, you have to master the lower categories. You have to know, you have to understand, you have to know about application before you can go on to the evaluation, etc. And it also depends upon your student preparedness. For example, let me explain this. I'm retired, I keep forgetting. We had both undergraduate and master's courses. So you would think that for the master's course, first semester, we should go directly to having a very large proportion of creativity questions, because ultimately they're master's students. However, we had students coming from different colleges, different universities from all over India. And therefore, they were not all at the level of preparedness with respect to the higher order thinking skills. They were all toppers, but some of them they were toppers and they had learned how to get those high marks by just memorizing. And therefore, in fact, sometimes we had more problems with the toppers than with the others, in order to make them realize that if they wanted to make their mark in the world tomorrow, they had to develop the high order learning skills. I believe all students have it in them. It's just a matter of them being aware of what they need to do, and to give them opportunities to develop these skills. And therefore, we talk about student preparedness. Even though they were master students, we had to go slow because many of them had not realized that an assessment could involve any skill other than maybe remembering and maybe understanding. They didn't realize that an assessment could involve questions of the evaluation. So I'm going to give you a workshop exercise that you're going to do just now. It's going to involve 3 to 5 minutes. I don't think we have time for more than that. I think all of you have got an email where you were told to get a question paper of a syllabus you're familiar with. And so you take that question paper and determine the percentage of questions in each of these categories: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Because only when you go through these exercises that you will become aware of certain things. You'll have queries, you'll find challenges. Okay. But before we go into the workshop mode, let me just go through very quickly what we understand by these various categories. I'm sure you're all familiar with them, but let's revise. Okay, so remembering is just the ability to give the information in an unaltered form. So they've learned it and they're giving it back to you. It could be a define, a name, a list, a when did. It involves terminology, facts, rules, events, examples, methodologies, principles, theories, structures. Okay, and so it's just memorization and giving the content. Understanding goes one step further. Now you ask a question so as to see whether they have been able to grasp the meaning of the study material. So you ask them to paraphrase, to translate, to rephrase, explain, to outline, to expand, to interpret, to differentiate, to rearrange. So, of course, you know your subject best. So which of these questions will help you know whether the student has grasped the meaning of the study material, or you've given the students an opportunity to develop the understanding skill? So it could be in terms of definitions, relationships, methods, theories, graphs, tables. You know, graphs and tables are beautiful examples for understanding. You give a graph or you give the students tables and you ask questions on that. Only if they've understood the graph, they've understood the table, will they be able to answer it. So instead of telling the student to just to put down a graph, which they must have memorized, you give them a graph, give them graphs and ask them to explain the differences, or ask them to give some facts about those graphs and tables. And then you have applying, where they will demonstrate the ability to use the learned material in a new concrete situation. So they can develop, modify, restructure, and it's with respect to principle, laws, procedures, experiments, phenomena. Now, I want to make one point very clear. Sometimes, now, a how would you? Okay, a how would you question could say, how would you do X, Y, or Z? They would have to, this would be an opportunity for the student to develop a methodology slightly different, slightly modified in the lower classes from what they know. This would be a question on application. If, however, you ask them, how would you carry out procedure X? Okay, or how would you synthesize compound X? and you have already given that to them through their textbook, through some notes, then it is not an applying. Though your question, the framing of your question leads to applying. How would you, application. But if it's a how would you of a method you've already given them through your notes or through the textbook, it is a question of remembering. So, let's not fool ourselves sometimes, because remember, the goal is to develop these skills in our students. The goal is not to show people how clever we are. The goal is to make the students develop these skills, give them opportunities, and therefore you have to be a little careful about this. Okay, then it is the applying, the demonstrating, the analyzing, the demonstrating the ability to use critical thinking skills. This again, compare, contrast, advantages, disadvantages, solve a logical problem, discuss pros and cons. Now, again, if compare and contrast, if a textbook has, suppose I'm giving you a simple example, plants and an animal cell. Now, if your textbook has given them the points of comparison and contrast, and you ask a compare and contrast question of a plant cell and an animal cell, or give differences between a plant cell and an animal cell, it is not analysis. It is a memorizing question. You know your material the best, so you would be able to, you are the best judge to know which category your question lies in. Now, the other thing is numerical problems. Again, numerical problems would be analyzing questions, unless you're giving them problems they've already seen, which then they won't help them develop the required skill. Just to emphasize what Father Fraser was saying, if you want to develop the numerical skills, you want to develop analytical skills, you have to put these questions in their question paper. The ability to demonstrate to judge the appropriateness. So they are now, what they're doing is they are evaluating which is the better process. So to evaluate, to validate, to assess, to justify, to critique, all these are your evaluating questions. And then, of course, creating, the ability to put several independent components together to form a new whole. Now, sometimes, the word creativity might be a little daunting to some of us, especially like in the first year or second year. So how would these students suddenly create new knowledge? It doesn't have to be let's not talk about, really, creation, absolutely new knowledge. They are taking all the concepts they've understood and they're putting it together to make in a slightly different way, a creation of knowledge. It does not have to be, pushing the frontiers of knowledge of the entire globe ahead. It doesn't have to go to, be that, challenging. In small ways, they are creating knowledge would be sufficient for them to develop these skills, so that tomorrow, perhaps one of your students could create knowledge to, push the boundaries of knowledge for the whole world. To design, to plan, to construct, to invent, to create. Okay. This is just a summary of all that I have said just now. And if you could perhaps take a screenshot, it would help you to analyze your paper and in any further deliberations you may have later on. Okay, this is just telling you about the various, Bloom's taxonomy, the modifications in the action form, and the kind of questions that you would frame in order to develop these various skills. Okay, and as Father Fraser says, we are not doing anything great. People have started at the much lower levels. They have assessments that help develop these skills in students of senior KG. And so to the workshop. Now, can I give you 3 minutes? Would 3 minutes be okay? For you to at least start the process, start looking at your paper and start seeing what is the rough percentage of questions in these various groups. I'm giving you the framework to help you in your task. You may not fill up a template. If you can just mark it on your the paper, which might be a faster process, that's enough, because I'm giving you a very short time. I'll give you a minute more. Okay, I think we'll stop there. This was just to give you a slight flavor of the process. What you really have to do is when you design the syllabus, you look at each component and decide the kind of how many marks for remembering and understanding, etc., as Father Fraser explained, and complete this template. Then this is that, of course, this is the template of the question paper. This is as per what my exercise. You would have, instead of question number, you could have your modules. And then, as Father Fraser said, it has to be a collaboration. You have to discuss it in your department. Have at least one more person go through that template with you, someone who's familiar with the content of your syllabus, to make sure that you have done justice to it. Just as you will look at somebody else's template and see whether they have justice, you can ask questions. This is not a it is not meant for you're not trying to be one up on someone, but it's a question of being able, because people will have queries, then you will explain. When you explain to someone, it becomes clearer to you what you have done. You can either be so sure that you've done the right thing, or maybe you think you could make some changes. And once you've done this template, when you set your paper in accordance with this template, not absolutely hard and fast. Like, let's say, for example, at the end, you have 20% for remembering, and you have 23% for remembering, or 18% for remembering, or there's a slight change. It's not exactly 20%. That's okay, as long as you've kind of covered the learning skills that you had planned for at the very beginning. Okay. Also, once you have planned this at the beginning, you will then start teaching that way. So if you have, let us say, you have put in, say, 20% for application, then while you are teaching, now how will the students suddenly be able to answer questions of 20% in your paper unless they have been given this opportunity through the semester to develop these skills? They can't do it overnight. So while you are interacting with your students, while you are teaching, you will have to stop from time to time and ask them to apply their skill of an analysis, evaluation, or understanding to the material you are teaching, and to help them to develop. They may get it right, they may get it wrong. So the way you will interact with them, your responses to what they are saying will help them develop it along the way. You could give them small, some homework to do. You could have small, groups within your class looking at certain problems. This will all help them to develop these skills, which you will assess in the final semester, end semester paper, or in the mid-semester paper. But this cannot be kept for just your paper. You will have to incorporate the development of these skills in your teaching learning right through the semester. Only then will your students develop these skills and do well in your paper. For the student, you may tell the student, every lecture that, for your future, you need to develop these skills. You will be a success if you develop these skills. The world today needs these skills. They will listen to you, but they will not really pay attention to it. They will not be acutely aware of developing these skills unless you tell them 20% of your paper is analysis. Then they'll think, okay, let me start making sure that I know how to answer these questions, or 20% is evaluation, or 20% is application. Only then will they pay attention to what you are saying, and that you are helping them to develop these skills, that they have to answer these kind of questions. Because doing well in the exam is the focus of, in fact, all students. Some of them might take it lightly, some of them will be more diligent, but all of them want to do well in the exams. And therefore, having this kind of a template, which you will share with them at the very beginning of the semester, which you will match with your teaching learning methodologies, will then help them to answer your paper well, get good marks, and in turn, develop these higher order learning skills. Okay. So this is with respect to the question paper format. Now let's go. I think I have another 20 minutes or so. So this is the other type of assessments, the alternate assessments, in the form of presentations, assignments, field visits, internships, etc. Now, why do we want to develop these? What do we want out of these alternate assessments? Why are we giving them these alternate assessments? Let's go to your course learning outcomes. I'm sure if those of you who have designed course learning outcomes have, along with these concept application and problem solving, etc., skills, included soft skills of communication and leadership and group dynamics. How do we develop these skills in our semester if we only have an end semester exam? Okay, so we have to use these alternate assessments. Now, if you are not in the autonomous system, they may not the marks of these may not add up in their final certificate, but you would have to incorporate these kind of assessments through your semester. If not, they're not going to, if you want to help them develop these skills, okay? If not, there's no opportunity. And students, you all know that students have different skills, and this cartoon very well explains the importance, therefore, of these alternate assessments. Okay. Now, not only do students have different skills, it's important that we help them to develop these varied skills. All of you know about the left brain and the right brain, and how only if you develop both logic and creativity skills do you develop holistically. You will also have to include into these alternate assessments some technology skills. Again, it's part and parcel, and in your online mode, even more so. But you have to use technology to develop skills, not just as a method which would further bring down our education system. Because you will all agree that this is the way we are evolving. And Bloom's taxonomy also says, as Father Fraser explained, that only if you develop and focus on all the three domains, the emotional, the physical, and the intellectual, will you have a holistic form of education and a holistic development of your student. So let's go back to assessment being the engine which drives student learning. We want to develop all these skills in students. Let's use assessment to do this. So you have various learning strategies: group learning, inquiry-based learning, peer learning, blended learning, values-directed learning, and so on. And you have to match them with your assessments. You are the teacher of the course. You know best what learning strategies you want to adopt and what assessments you would like to give. So you can have oral presentations, written assignments, projects, field trips, poster presentations, debates, and you can be as creative in designing these alternate assessments so as to achieve your course outcomes. Now, you have designed these assessments. How do you really help the student achieve or develop these skills? I believe it is through rubrics. And this is what we did at St. Xavier's College also. And I think St. Xavier's College, and I'm sure it still continues this process. So you have rubrics, which has the criteria, the descriptors, and the level of performance. Now, I saw in the UGC document, they are also talking about rubrics. They've given you some examples of rubrics, but of course, the UGC document is only giving you guidelines. It's asking you to think. And therefore, they have not given a very detailed rubric. Now, what St. Xavier's College did was make this rubric very, very descriptive so that students really know what you expect of them. See, normally what happens, sometimes the student comes and makes a presentation and you give some marks. The student thinks he or she has given a brilliant presentation and comes out with average marks. And then one is where, either is depressed or is angry or frustrated that he or she has not got the maximum marks that he or she wanted or was the focus. Therefore, we have very detailed rubrics, and let me explain this. Let us say you have an oral presentation, and the two main criteria would be presentation and content. Now, let us say for convenience, we give 10 marks to each, presentation and content. Okay, now within presentation, what do we mean by presentation? Okay, we're talking about presentation skills, use of visuals, timing and pace of talk, and comprehensibility. So the student knows that for the student to get good marks, the student must concentrate on all these, not just the presentation skill, but also visuals, the timing and the pace of the talk, the comprehensibility. See, there are two things about this. One is so that the student knows what you're expecting. Okay, we call that the feed forward. See, we always give feedback. Okay, we tell the student where you've gone wrong. Why not tell them ahead of time what we are expecting of them so that they know our expectations? Now, what do these expectations reflect? They reflect the skills we want to develop in our students. Why are we giving students oral presentations? Because we know that oral presentations is something that they will have to do later on. It will give them the confidence. It will help them in their future, areas, wherever, whether in, globally. Therefore, we want them to have all these various skills. So we put down these various skills we want them to develop and tell them we are going to mark you accordingly. Still further, we give them a division of marks so that they know what emphasis we are going to give on these various skills. Then we further outline what we mean by presentation skills. What are presentation skills? Clear voice, whether the student has maintained eye contact, etc. You are experts at all these. You have your teaching experience. You could fill this up. What I wanted to do through this was to make you aware that you should be very descriptive of your criteria so that they know what you're expecting and they develop these skills. When I had my students, I used to tell them that if you're going to give an oral presentation, catch your sister, your friend, your parent, anyone, and give them make a presentation. Ask them, is my voice clear? Am I maintaining eye contact? Practice these various skills because only practice makes you perfect. Okay. And so we gave them detailed, this is not exactly what St. Xavier's has, but it is representative. We gave them, all the descriptors in detail so that they knew what our expectations were. Okay. Now, how does this help? It serves as a feed forward. It helps communicate expectations of quality of assessment. Students can concentrate on the criteria when preparing the assignment, presentation, and thus developing the intent skills. This is not just assignment or presentation. It could be anything, a field trip, an internship. Example for presentation skills, we could look at varied rate of delivery, changed pitch for emphasis, no distracting mannerisms, good eye contact, etc. During the assessment phase, the faculty have explicit and consistent criteria for assessment. Now, you all know that, especially when you have your larger classes, you can't have all the presentations on the same day. So how do you maintain a consistent criteria for assessment? Because we are human. I'm listening to the presentation at the end of the day. I will assess it differently as to when I am listening to a presentation at the beginning of a day. It happens. It's an objective assessment. Post-assessment, it acts as a detailed feedback. Now, we've already given them a detailed feed forward. Is it necessary to give them a detailed feedback? Even after telling students about all these criteria, they had to practice. On the day of the presentation, often students were so involved in their presentation material that some of them would be fidgeting with their ID card. Some of them would be looking at the board, not looking at the audience at all. Some of them would be giving their presentation in a sing-song manner. So it happens because, as I said, practice makes you perfect. So this acts as a detailed feedback to the student. They are aware of their strengths and weaknesses. They know their areas of improvement for future presentations or assignments or assessments. It serves as a record of the assessment. So later on, if someone wants to know, especially in an autonomous system, it acts as a record of the assessment. And these rubrics, the completed ones, must be shown to students, just as you should show answer papers. And depending upon the strength of your class, it could be accompanied by a short discussion. These rubrics could be used not only for individual activities, but also for group activities. In group activities, you would have to have a slightly different rubric, where as a group they would be assessed for all the criteria, except for one special criteria which would be individual. This could be in terms of the individual presentation skills, the how the individual answered questions, where, so there would be both a group and an individual aspect. Okay, so the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be ignited. And with that, I will stop presenting, because I'd like to see if there are any queries. There's just one point I would like to make, is that I believe everything should be assessed. So even if you have a speaker coming into your class, okay, now why are we calling a specific speaker? Because we know that that speaker is an expert in his or her field, explains the concepts very well, and my students will gain from that lecture. However, students are students. We also were students, are sometimes students even now. You tend to ignore the speaker, and you are dreaming, or looking at the one is looking at your mobile or whatever. Now, if you put a component of assessment, that is, you tell the student immediately after the lecture of the invited speaker, I will give you 10 minutes to write down a short summary of what you learned through that 1 hour talk. You could give 1 mark or 2 marks, you could look through it, but just keeping a small assessment will make the students more alert during the lecture. So I really believe that assessment is the engine that drives student learning, and that we could use it to enhance our students' abilities. Thank you.